hemen.
Kaçamaz, kaçamaz.
Hey, Poppy.
Dur kızım!
Atki! Bakleni şadiyo! Nusna garan kazgan! Tu! Urodi! Господи, какво чакаш? Ръмпърли, Господи! Вразмен поне!
Aşağı! Ah papazım! Kara papazım benim!
Vur davulcu vur, sağlam vur bakayım hadi. Ali kaldırın koca göbeğe bakalım.
Vur bakalım davulu, vur!
Hoppa hoppa hop hop. Salla salla bakalım salla.
Yandan al, yandan!
İşsiz durmayı.
Vur davulu!
Yallah. Gene çevir bakalım.
Ha papaz, koca papaz, kara papaz!
Като ги изклаха, чичо, аз видях. С топор ги сечеха. Ей тъй на дръвника. А пак аз и плачех, па ме беше страх. Само бачо Пеньо с голям глас извика. И издъхна бачо. А един хайдук баба ми заклая под вехтата страха и кръвта потече из нашия капчук. А аз и бях малък. И мен не заклах. А бе много страшно там да бъдеш ти. Не знам, що не щяха и мен да заколат. В оня големи огън черквата на Жучичо изгоря. И школото пламе. И девойки 200 станаха на въглен. А кака и Леля и други жени мъчиха ги 2 дни, та па ги затриха. Още слушам, чичо, как пискато ми. И детенца много на мъждрак набиха. Всички свят затриха, как не бе ги грях. И уж беше страшно, пък не бе ме страх. Аз треперех само, но не плачех веки. Но нашето село Чичо запустя. И татко и мама веки не станах. Ти, Чичо, не си чул заради Батак. Аз съм оттамо. Много е далече.
Hello, everyone. I have been spending some time working on an article on the origins of the Albanian-Serbian War, and really how deep it goes into history, how rooted it is into history. And so I've been working on this article on and off since last week, and I have 3,000 words so far, 3,000 plus words so far. And, you know, it's one of those things where you want to get done with the article, but at the same time, you want to be thorough and you want to have a good amount of detail. You want to be specific and you want to educate people who would read the article. And so you find something interesting in the history, and then you find something new. I mean, anyone who has done an article, people who do research, know what I'm talking about. You think you found something, but then you find something else that correlates or that connects with the subject that you are researching, and you just don't stop. You keep finding new things, and you keep learning new things, and you find out one historical event, and then you find out that it's linked to an older historical event. So you have to read about that older historical event. And so it's just, it's very edifying and it's very educational and informative. And so I want to take my time to write this article and to really research the origins of the war between the Serbs and the Albanians in Kosovo in the 1990s. And so you go back down to the early 1900s, but then you find out that, you know, Albanian nationalism existed in the 19th century, in the 1800s, and you just keep going and going. And so today I was reading about the Austro-Hungarians in the Balkans and how the Austro-Hungarians were using conflict in Macedonia as a way to justify intervention in the Balkans. And I was reading about how the Macedonians and the Bulgarians did an uprising against Ottoman rule. And I found out about something called the April Uprising, in which the Bulgarians rose up against Ottoman rule. They no longer wanted to be a part of Ottoman rule. And there was a town in Bulgaria called Batok. And the men of Batok rose up against Ottoman rule, and this was in the year 1876. And they fought against the Ottomans. And the Ottomans in Batok, they were led by a man named Ahmet Aja. And Ahmet Aja unleashed a force of irregular soldiers upon the Bulgarian fighters. And these irregulars were known as the Bashi Bazuk. The Bashi Bazuk were irregulars who were mainly recruited amongst the Albanians, but these particular irregulars, these particular Bashi Bazuk, were recruited amongst a people called the Pomaks. The Pomaks were Bulgarian Muslims, and they still exist today. They live in Turkey, Greece, and in Bulgaria. And these were Bulgarian Muslims who were enlisted by the Ottomans as irregulars, and they were extremely ruthless. And Ahmet Aja unleashed an army of about 5,000 Bashi Bazuks, Pomak Bashi bazooks on the Bulgarians in Batok. And after one battle, the Bulgarian fighters said that they wanted to negotiate. And Ahmed Aja said that if they drop their arms, if they drop their weapons, that they would be spared, and that the Pomaks would leave Batok. And so the soldiers laid down their arms, and they were butchered. They were beheaded. And the Bashi bazooks, the Pomaks, unleashed their bloodlust on the civilian population and also on the leadership of Batok. And many people tried to hide in the church, and they tried to hide in the homes of the wealthy class, the wealthier people. The reason for this was because the church and the homes of the wealthy were better constructed and they were more fortified. And they went to one home of a wealthy man, and they said, if you surrender, if you give up, you will be spared. And the people inside the house believed them. They got out of the house. They were let out. And the Bashi bazooks, the Pomaks, told these people to strip off their clothes. They told them, take off your clothes because we're going to steal them. We want them. So the people took off their clothes. And the reason why they wanted them to take off their clothes was because they didn't want their blood to stain the clothing, because they were going to butcher them and steal their clothes. And that's what happened. And they were all brutally murdered. Then Ahmed Aja went to the mayor of the town, and he told the mayor to tell the rest of the Bulgarian fighters to give up their arms, give up their weapons. And the mayor did just that. He went to the rebel camp, the camp where all of the fighters were, and he told them to drop their weapons, to allow their weapons to be confiscated by the Turks. And after the Turks confiscated their weapons, they were all butchered. And they took the mayor of Batok, they took the mayor of the city, and they killed them in the most horrific way imaginable. They pulled out his teeth, they plucked his eyeballs out, and they impaled him. And by impale him, I mean they skewered him into his anus, through his mouth, and they did it in a way where he would be kept alive. They skewered him like a shish kebab. And the term that Ahmed Aja used when he ordered him to be impaled was shishak aur, which means put him on a skewer, cook him like a shish kebab. And they skewered him in a way where they could keep him alive, and they had him suspended on this shish kebab. By suspended, I mean he was literally being shish kebabbed alive. And then they hovered his body over a fire, and they cooked him alive. And they forced his family to watch. And they took his little grandson, a little infant, and chopped the little infant up to pieces. And of course, they forced the mother to watch. And I want to read to you guys an account. And this was written by the wife of the mayor's son. Her name was Bosilka. And this is what she wrote. She said, "My father-in-law went to meet the Bashi Bazouk when the village was surrounded by the men of Ahmed Aja, who said that he wanted all the arms laid down. Trendafel, this is the mayor, went to collect them from the villagers. When he surrendered the arms, they shot him with a gun, and the bullet scratched his eye. Then I heard Ahmed Aja command with his own mouth for Trendafil to be impaled and burnt. The words he used were shishak aor, which is Turkish for to put on a skewer, as a shish kebab. After that, they took all the money he had, undressed him, gouged his eyes, pulled out his teeth, and impaled him slowly on a stake until it came out of his mouth. Then they roasted him while he was still alive. He lived for half an hour during this terrible scene. At the time, I was near Ahmed Aja with other Bulgarian women. We were surrounded by Bashi Bazuk, who had us surrounded and forced us to watch what was happening to Trendafil. One of her children, and this is from the wiki account, the wiki article, it says, one of her children, Vladimir, who was still a baby at his mother's breast, was impaled on a sword in front of her eyes. And this is what she wrote, quote, "At the time this was happening, Ahmed Aja's son took my child from my back and cut him to pieces. There in front of me, the burnt bones of Trendafil stood there for 1 month, and only then they were buried." And there was an American journalist who visited Batok after the massacre. And he along another journalist named Eugene Schuler, described how they saw literally thousands upon thousands of bodies in Batok. Pregnant women who had their infants ripped from their wombs. And they would literally attack pregnant women and rip the infants, rip the fetuses from their wombs. Decapitated people just horrific, impaled, burned alive. And after the people laid down their weapons, because the Turks did not want an armed population against them, and after the Turks got the people to lay down their arms, and their weapons were confiscated, everybody in the village was either impaled, beheaded, or burned alive. And on the Wikipedia article about the Batok Massacre, there is a photo that you can see, an old black and white photo, and it shows this old lady sitting down, and around her are the skulls of those who were butchered in the Batok Massacre. And in the description of the photo, it says, "Postcard depicting human remains from the Batok Massacre. Author and date of the postcard is unknown." And it's just so dismal. And I want to read to you guys another account. This is from a journalist who was there. His last name was Schuler. Eugene Schuler was his name. And this is what he wrote. This is what he saw when he went to Batok. He said, "On every side were human bones, skulls, ribs, and even complete skeletons. Heads of girls still adorned with braids of long hair, bones of children, skeletons still encased in clothing. Here was a house, the floor of which was white with the ashes and charred bones of 30 persons burned alive there. Here was the spot where the village notable, Trendafil, was spitted on a pike and then roasted, and where he is now buried. There was a foul hole full of decomposing bodies. Here a mill dam filled with swollen corpses. Here the schoolhouse where 200 women and children were taken refuge there, were burned alive. And here the church and churchyard where fully 1,000 half-decayed forms were still to be seen, filling the enclosure in a heap several feet high, arms, feet, and heads protruding from the stones, which had vainly been thrown there to hide them, and poisoning all the air." And reading these accounts, you can totally see why the Bulgarians fought to be free of Ottoman rule. You can see why the Serbs fought for independence from Ottoman rule. You can see why the Greeks fought for their independence from Ottoman despotism. It's horrific. It is so demonic. It's so demonic. And evil is so obvious. And it reminds me of what happened in the 1980s in the Lebanese Civil War in Sabra and Shatila. The PLO surrendered. They made a peace agreement with the Lebanese Phalangist, the Kataib. They both made an agreement, and part of the agreement was that civilians would not be harmed. And the PLO left the refugee camps, the Palestinian refugee camps, and the civilian population in the camps no longer had armed men to protect them. And these Kataib fascist bastards saw it as an opportunity to indulge in their bloodlust, in their sadistic bloodlust. And for several days, they spent time literally murdering thousands of people, murdering and raping and robbing in the refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila. The Bulgarians were fighting, and the Turks said, well, if you lay down your arms, you'll be fine. And they laid down their arms, and the whole population ended up murdered, raped. And it really makes you, it makes you wonder about life. Because this is not the only time that this type of thing has happened. This type of thing has happened countless times. And it's happening today. And it's not just in the Balkans. It's not just in Africa. It's not just in the Middle East. Massacres have happened in America's neighboring countries. Massacres have happened in Mexico. They've happened in Guatemala with the cartels. And we've had massacres right here in the United States. Now, of course, nothing as bad as what we read about in the Batok Massacre or in Sabra and Shatila. But nonetheless, we have had massacres here in the United States. People getting slaughtered in a country western music concert in Las Vegas. And in Texas, we've had these massacres taking place. I remember a number of years ago, I think it was back in 2019, there was a massacre in a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. Dozens of people were murdered by a neo-Nazi. Life is depressing. Life is depressing. You don't know when some maniacs are going to come and kill you. And you don't know if one day your country is going to get invaded, your neighborhood's going to get invaded. You don't know if some guy with a gun is going to kill you when you're in a grocery store just trying to buy some regular products. Life is very capricious, and it's very depressing. It really is, guys. And it's the reality. I mean, the reality is that life is depressing. It's dismal. It's gloomy. It's doomerish. You don't know when, oh, honey, I'm going to go to the grocery store to pick some things up. Do you want something? Oh, yeah, give me some coffee. You go there, you end up dead. Or, like in the case with these Bulgarians, some lunatic people go into your town and just kill everybody. And before you know it, you're being impaled alive. It's just evil is all around us. It's all around us. And I've read some horrific stories from here in the United States. I mean, home invasions and families being massacred. I mean, it happened recently in Texas. Some guy killed a family, slaughtered a family. He was using his gun for target practice on his front yard, and then one of the neighbors said, hey, my baby's trying to sleep. It's 11 o'clock at night, and he gets mad and kills a whole family. It's horrific. It really is horrific. And people get depressed over this, and who could blame them? Life is depressing. It's very capricious. You don't know when evil is going to strike. And I think there is hope to be found in simple things like music, like talking to friends, like, doing a live stream. I find happiness in doing my Friday live stream, talking to you guys, having a bit of fun, listening to some music, reading, doing some gardening. But nonetheless, the reality still stands. the depressing reality of life still stands. And you read about all these wars. I've been spending time reading about the Balkans and the history of the Balkans and these wars that took place in Eastern Europe. And you read about things like the Crimean War, and you find out 500,000 Russians died fighting in that war. 500,000 people, just like that. And you think, each one of those soldiers that was killed had a mother and a father, and they raised that child up, and they played with that child, and they took care of him, and they raised him up, and they spent decades raising this child up, feeding him, taking care of him, dealing with his problems, whatever they were, only for that son to die in some war. And that happened 500,000 times in the case of the Russians in the Crimean War. And there are countless stories like this in human history. Or, you read about just regular things in the news. Not regular, but you read about, things in the news. Some guy goes to a store and kills a bunch of people. Some guy goes to a Walmart and kills a bunch of people. It's like one moment you're thinking, I'm going to go grocery shopping. Then later on I'm going to do something else. And you're dead. It's like evil can strike at any time. And this is the depressing reality of life. It's the depressing reality of life. And thank goodness there's a God. Thank goodness there is a God, everybody. Because if God did not exist, this life would be meaningless. But thankfully, God exists. And thankfully, the reason why there is so much misery in the world is because there is a war between good and evil. The hope that we have is that we are indeed in a war between good and evil. And it is in the awareness of this cosmic struggle between light and dark, good and evil, that the void of life becomes bittersweet.
Чому я знову червонію, я знову питаю себе, навіщо тобі так жити? Чому ти пливеш з вітрами долі, допоки не чуєш, допоки не будеш сам на самоті. На самоті. На самоті. Я знову палаю, я знову вбиваю себе на самоті. Я знову чекаю тебе на самоті. На самоті. Я знову палаю, я знову вбиваю себе на самоті. Я знову чекаю тебе на самоті. На самоті. самоті. На самоті я знову палаю, я знову вбиваю себе на самоті. Я знову чекаю тебе на самоті.